KPRC on iHeartRadio. Now, more Jimmy Barrett Show.
I've been promoting this guy all day. 4:33 here on AM 950 KPRC. We put a new phone system in. By the way, new does not mean better. It just means new. It's like the copy machine in the newsroom. It's a new copy machine. It sucks. The old one worked much better. Evidently, we got the problem cleared up, though. That's good. We've been talking about this all day, the death of Jeffrey Epstein while in custody, and all the excuses we're hearing. You know, the guards are overworked. We don't have enough help. He went hours without being checked on, evidently, despite the fact he'd been on suicide watch the week before. They say he was no longer on suicide watch. Maybe that wasn't a good decision either, huh? Joining us to talk about it, because the conspiracy theories are running crazy on all this, is Dr. Alex L. Carmen. He heads up the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University in Fort Worth. I'm sure you're hearing all the conspiracy theories. What do you think, Alex?
I sure am, and thanks for having me this afternoon. The same as always, in the sense that, everyone else is pointing fingers and trying to figure out what happened. I mean, I tell you, I've never heard of a case similar to this one, in the sense that you've got a guy that attempts suicide one day, and within 7 days, he's allowed to engage in that behavior without any kind of oversight. I mean, it's unheard of.
Well, what's interesting to me as well is the former inmate at that facility told the New York Post that the ceiling is like 8 or 9 feet. He says there's no way for you to connect to anything. They give you sheets, but they're not normal sheets. They're like paper level. They're not strong enough to hang yourself with. Epstein weighed about a couple 100 pounds. He doesn't think there's any way he could have died that way. And we're not hearing anything so far from the coroner.
Yeah, well, part of it is that we don't know what we don't know, right? So
right.
Part of the issue right now, we have no idea exactly how he did it, who found him, how long he had died at the time that they found him. What we do know, however, is, and what I'm pointing out to, is the fact that, first of all, you've got a guy that is a high visibility, individual in a jail facility. So that right there tells you, from a jail protocol, that this person would have been in isolation, and he would have had oversight 24/7, just by virtue of who the inmate is, right? Who the prisoner is. Secondly, that once the person exhibits or shows sign that, in this case, within a week ago, that he tried to commit suicide, then you obviously try to isolate the person the second time around, and you put him on a suicide watch. Even if his lawyer does request the removal of the suicide watch, you pretty much say, no, I'm sorry, but this guy tried to kill himself earlier on, and we're going to go ahead and keep an eye on him. So it's just really odd. I mean, it's very odd. A lot of pieces of this puzzle don't fit.
The thing I think that probably also helps fuel these kind of conspiracy theories, Dr. Del Carmen, quite honestly, is that here's somebody that has a Clinton connection, and I'm not going to get into that whole thing about all the people who mysteriously died around the Clintons, but there have been quite a few people that just met an untimely demise, and this just happens to be another one. That's the kind of, and I'm trying real hard not to go all full bore conspiracy theory on this, and to think that is indeed the case. But that helps to feed the monster, does it not?
Well, I mean, it may feed the monster, but from my perspective as a criminologist, what I really care about is that the jail protocol was probably violated in this case, and that secondly, the many victims of this individual, alleged victims, we should say, are not going to have a day in court. I mean, that's just really, really sad, in the sense that they're going to have to resort to a civil, outcome in order to be able to find some sort of restitution. And from what I understand, there are dozens of individuals that have been victimized by this guy. And so that to me is the greatest, fault here, is the fact that the authorities simply look the other way, at least it seems to, from this perspective, and that this guy was allowed to commit suicide and find an easy way out of justice.
Well, yeah, at the very least, Dr. Del Carmen, I think what we're dealing here is with somebody, and you know how the prison system works. It sounds weird to say it, but I guess to a certain extent, there's honor amongst thieves, is there not? In that people who exploit children in particular, or do harm to children, are generally the lowest form of life within the prison system, and they are targets, are they not?
That's exactly right. So the prison subculture, right? So if you're a murderer, you have some degree of respect. But if you are a child molester or someone that's been accused or convicted of a child-related crime, among inmates, that is the lowest level, of social standing in that jail. So, and by the way, you add to that the fact that this guy was a celebrity, has been featured in the news all throughout the world in the past few weeks and few months. Clearly, this person would have been in an isolation facility where they would have had a camera on him. They would have had frequent visits by jail personnel. They would have ensured that there was nothing in that cell that he could use in order to commit suicide. There is an entire protocol that you follow on someone like this guy, but yet no one seems to have an answer.
What's funny about that too is that a couple of things you just mentioned. Supposedly, all those cells are under video surveillance, but for some reason the video camera wasn't working, the one that was trained on his cell. The other thing is that he had a cellmate up until a few days ago. They transferred the cellmate out and didn't replace them with anybody, so you don't have a witness there either.
Right. So my point is, I teach statistics, for many master's level and now PhD students. And I tell you, I always talk about statistical probability and statistical possibility, right? So what is the probability that all of these things would have gone wrong for no one to have an explanation as to how this guy died? It is unheard of. That not only, the camera is not working, not only the inmate is transferred, but then all these other things that happen apparently in sequence over the past 72 hours that would have allowed for him to almost engage in the perfect crime. So I just really have serious doubts.
How do you think this investigation will conduct itself? The Attorney General, Bill Barr, is basically saying we are going to continue to follow this case, and we're going to continue to work on convicting any of his associates, and we are going to investigate the manner in which he died and what went wrong at this corrections facility. How difficult is it going to be to prove if there is any wrongdoing involved in this?
Well, dead people don't talk, right? So at the end of the day, this guy is not going to come back from his death and basically give us names and details that perhaps he was privy to that no one else may be, right? But I'm still confident that there's some information out there, maybe computer data rather, emails, text, individuals that may have seen, heard, video that may actually point him as having done wrongdoing to others. So there may be some of that. There will also be some civil action, no doubt. But really, the main, sort of element of this entire, alleged crime or series of crimes is now dead and unable to tell us a lot that died with him.
Alex, I know this is something you've studied your whole adult life, and that is jail safety, the criminal justice system, criminal justice reform, those types of things. What are the biggest needs within the criminal justice system to kind of change the way the system works? We don't really rehabilitate people, do we? We just punish them.
Well, we punish them, but we really, it's more about, isolating them from society, right? So the whole perspective that we have on the prison system is, somebody does something wrong, put them in a prison, get them away from our main sites and we'll forget about it. And rehab, I have no doubt that we have many good rehab programs in prison, but at the end of the day, what people don't realize and haven't realized for years is that people come out of prison and they're the ones that are sitting next to us at a movie theater. They're the ones that are serving us a drink at a bar. They're the ones that are waiting on our tables. So bottom line though is inmates have to go somewhere after they get out of prison. It's not a permanent state for most of the inmate population. And people in society, I don't think we recognize that reality, because if we did, we would actually demand and require from our politicians to do a better job in that prison reform component.
Okay, I want to pick your brain a little bit more. Can you hang on through the break here, and we'll come right back with you?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Dr. Alex Del Carmen is with us. He's at Tarleton University, that's up around Fort Worth. Heads up the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies there. We'll be back with more with him in just a moment here on AM 950 KPRC. Dr. Alex Del Carmen is with us, expert on jail safety. Also, by the way, heads up the School of Criminology, Criminal Justice, and Strategic Studies at Tarleton State University in Fort Worth. What is the number one need as far as criminal justice reform, as far as you're concerned, Alex?
It's a hard question to answer because I think we have multiple needs in the criminal justice system, right? So for starters, if you look at the aspect of it, we need to have, the public obviously support our police across the board, regain the confidence that they once had in policing. I think we're dealing with issues right now in recruitment for police officers. A lot of cities are suffering, literally, starving from adequate candidates, eligible candidates that would actually apply to the police force because of all the bad publicity that they have received over the past 3 to 5 years. When it comes to corrections, we see that the courts are also challenged in the sense that, due process is carried out, educating the public as to what to expect when they show up to court, giving access to court settings across the board, including minorities. And then you look at the actual, correctional aspect of it. And as you can see in this one story that we're talking about today, following safety protocols, being able to be smart about the individuals that you have there, classifying them, and then ultimately rehabilitating them to come back to society again.
It's a multi-pronged problem. There's no doubt about it. You were mentioning police officers, and I couldn't help but think of what's been going on lately in New York City, where you got people basically throwing water on cops and the city refusing to do anything about it or to prosecute anybody for doing it.
Right. I mean, so I think what we see now is we see that across the United States, police officers, I'm not saying everyone is doing this. I think that I've always believed the majority of Americans support law enforcement. But I do feel that there is a pocket out there of people that are very critical towards policing. And that's not to say that some of them are not justified. I mean, we've seen horrible cases of police abuse and racial profiling and whatnot across the U.S. as well. But I will continue to argue that 99.9% of our police officers are honest, decent, hardworking people. And unfortunately, those that should have never been police officers are being covered, by the media and through their own wrongdoings. And folks seem to exaggerate that this is a pervasive problem on the board all the time, which is not the case.
No, and we've got, as you know, here in Texas, we have the case around Galveston, where the police officers were on horseback, and they arrested a guy, and they tied him up with a rope to take him in. They didn't have a squad car to put him in, so they took him in that way. And of course, a lot of pictures got taken. And it brought up images from, let's just say, the distant past here in the South and how blacks were treated. And they turned this into almost a federal case on this. Even have the Texas Rangers involved in this. Are we making too big a deal out of this? Or does this... Go ahead.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think in that particular case, the optics are horrible. But then in addition to that, no human being should be treated that way, right? So at the end of the day, whether you're black, brown, green, yellow, whatever color you are, you shouldn't be, that's just simply bad police procedure, right? And in this case, a possible violation of this person's civil rights. So at the end of the day, I'm glad to see that the chief took it upon himself to call in for the Texas Rangers to investigate and whatnot. That is the right thing to do. And as I've said before, right, it's not the issue that is at hand sometimes, it's how the law enforcement component responds to it. And in this particular case, you saw that the chief took it upon himself to do something about it. I think he should have. He comes from Dallas, by the way. And so I think that those are the kinds of scenarios where you just sort of scratch your head and wonder, who recruited these people into law enforcement? What was going through their head when they did this?
Generally speaking, what do you think of Texas prison conditions? And the reason why I asked the question is we had a story on Houston's Morning News this morning on our sister station, KTRH, about the state of air conditioning within the Texas penal system. And I guess central air in Texas prisons is a relatively new development. I guess for years and years, for decades, for eons of time, these prisons were not air conditioned, and they have a rule now that the maximum temperature has to be 88 degrees or below. It's hard to imagine that you can keep civil order inside of a penal institution without AC in the summer.
Right, but look, I think what's happened in the past, and this is not only in Texas but across the United States, is that we've seen that the general sense of the public towards prisons is that inmates should not be more comfortable than the rest of us, right? So the idea is that, if you got to be paying for your AC, and if your AC breaks down and you got to find the money to repair it, why should an inmate that's actually committed, in some cases, a horrible crime, right? Why should they enjoy the privilege of the healthcare system that, some people consider adequate, at food, having your 3 squares, every day, and having, the opportunity to be, in some cases educated. And so at the end of the day, there's this mindset, and we call that in criminology, by the way, the principle of least eligibility. The idea that you simply should have less of a quality of life than the rest of us in prison. Now, the other side of that is the humanity and the humane factor, right? So do you want not only to keep order in prison, but what is the humane way of treating people? And I would argue that air conditioning is a vital component of that.
Well, you would think so. When the temperature is 100 degrees on the outside, I can only imagine what it would be like inside of a prison. With all
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Right.
All right. Dr. Del Carmen, always good to talk to you, sir. Thank you for your insight. I appreciate it.
You too. Thanks for having me again.
Have a great day. That's Dr. Alex Del Carmen, Tarleton University, that's in Fort Worth, joining us here on AM 950 KPRC.